The wind howls like a hungry wolf across the North Atlantic, slamming against jagged cliffs and sweeping through frostbitten fjords where silence is broken only by the roar of the storm. Snow lashes sideways, ice cracks beneath heavy clouds, and yet tucked into the earth, low and resolute, stands a structure that refuses to fall. A Viking house, not a grand fortress or a stone castle, but a humble, elongated shell of wood and turf, built by hands hardened by sea and flame. No iron spikes pin its walls. No nails hold it together. Yet it stands, and has stood for centuries. This is not just a home, it's a survival machine, forged not for comfort but endurance. Here, at the edge of the world, the Vikings didn't merely weather storms. They engineered their homes to embrace them, to flex with them, to defy the brute strength of nature through elegant, quiet wisdom. We often remember the Vikings for their raids, their ships, their sagas carved in fire and blood. But hidden behind their legends lies a deeper story, one of ingenuity, of adaptation, of intimate understanding of land, wind, and timber. Today, we begin a journey not across oceans, but through walls, wooden, turf-laden, ancient walls, to ask one simple question. How did these homes survive the storm without a single nail? And what does that reveal about a people who built not just to live, but to last? In the harsh northern lands where the sun lingers low and the winters never ask permission, the Vikings turned to the forests for salvation. Towering pine, spruce, and oak became more than just trees. They were lifelines, shelter, and silent witnesses to survival. Unlike empires that imported marble or hewed sandstone from distant quarries, the Vikings worked with what was beneath their boots and above their heads. Timber wasn't just available, it was sacred, selected not for aesthetics but for strength, flexibility, and grain direction. Each log was chosen with the patience of someone who knew that a poor beam could mean a collapsed roof under snow. The process was deeply intuitive. Driftwood, seasoned by salt and sea, was prized for its resistance to rot. Straight, knot-free trunks were split by hand using wooden wedges, a technique that preserved the wood's natural fibers and ensured long-lasting integrity. There was no sawmill, no blueprint, just a mental map passed down through generations of how wind pushed against a gable or how rain pooled near the eaves. And yet, from this relationship with the land came buildings that seemed to grow out of the soil itself, low, huddled, aerodynamic. The Vikings did not bend nature to their will. They built in rhythm with it. Every creak of timber, every groan of sod, was part of a living conversation between human and earth. This was not architecture in the modern sense. It was survival poetry crafted by axe, guided by wind, and held together by an invisible force more enduring than nails. Knowledge passed through calloused hands beneath skies heavy with snow. To the outsider, it might seem like a flaw. How could a structure possibly endure centuries of gales, blizzards, and tremors without the iron grip of nails? But to the Vikings, the absence of nails was no oversight. It was an innovation born of necessity and wisdom. In a world where iron was precious, smelted with great effort and often reserved for weapons or tools, every spike driven into a plank was a costly choice. But even more profound was the understanding that nails, rigid and inflexible, were not allies in a shifting, trembling world. Iron corrodes, it snaps. It holds firm when the earth quivers or the wind surges until it breaks. Viking builders knew better. Their structures didn't resist nature. They moved with it. Instead of nailing beams together, they used age-old joinery techniques, cutting, fitting, locking wood into wood with a precision that modern architects might envy. Like bones in a body or ribs in a ship, the parts of a Viking house were meant to flex, expand, and breathe. They carved mortise and tenon joints with stone tools or iron axes, fitting one timber snugly into another like a hand into a glove. Pegs of hardwood, sometimes birch or ash, took the place of metal, swelling with moisture over time to tighten the grip. These homes weren't hammered together, they were woven, locked, cradled. And because they weren't rigid, they could absorb the violence of a storm, the heaving of frost, the weight of snow, without breaking. What modern engineers might call dynamic load resistance, the Vikings simply called survival. In the Nordic wilderness, resilience didn't come from resisting the world, it came from knowing how to yield just enough to remain unbroken. Step closer to the bones of a Viking house, and you'll see the truth hidden in its joints. No rusted nails, no hasty hammer work, just the quiet mastery of wood locked into wood. This was the genius of joinery, a language of curves, grooves, and tension taught by fathers beside hearths, and perfected in the hush of snowbound forests. The mortise and tenon joint, a classic of ancient carpentry, formed the backbone of their frames. A protruding tongue of one beam slid precisely into the carved socket of another, the fit so tight it held with friction and time. Scarf joints, angled splices of timber, lengthened beams without weakening them, while wooden pegs, carefully dried and then driven in, would swell with moisture, tightening the embrace. It wasn't just clever, it was alive. These joints allowed the building to flex like a living organism. During violent winds, they shifted minutely, distributing force across the frame rather than snapping like nailed structures often do. There was elegance in their simplicity and brutal honesty in their effectiveness. Every piece of wood had a memory, a curve, a grain, and Viking craftsmen read it like scripture. They carved and shaped not for symmetry, but for strength, guided by intuition and centuries of oral knowledge. Modern builders, with their blueprints and bolts, might scoff at such rudimentary construction, but wind tunnel tests on reconstructed longhouses show what the Vikings already knew. In the dance between structure and storm, rigidity breaks while flexibility survives. Their homes didn't fight the storm, they yielded, bowed, then stood tall again when the fury passed. From a distance, a Viking home looked less like a building and more like a hill that decided to grow a door. Thick turf blanketed the walls and roof, stitched into place with layers of thatch and sod, making the structure seem born from the earth itself. But this was no accident of style, it was deliberate engineering. Turf was not just insulation, it was armor. Packed tight over timber frames, the dense living layer of grass and soil absorbed rain, muffled wind, and stabilized internal temperatures. It resisted fire, resisted rot, and bent the edge of the cold. In winter, snow piled harmlessly atop it, insulating even further. In summer, wildflowers might bloom from the rooftop, disguising the dwelling beneath a crown of color. But beneath that beauty was survival science. Timber alone would have been too brittle, too porous, too light to survive the Arctic blasts. But combined with turf, it became something else, flexible yet firm, porous yet sealed. The Vikings didn't just use turf as a topping, they integrated it into the structure, layering it with birch bark and straw to create a natural, breathable shell that repelled water while trapping warmth. In effect, they wrapped their homes in the very skin of the land, blending them into the landscape so seamlessly that enemies could pass by without noticing. It was camouflage and climate control rolled into one, a primitive but profound fusion of biology and architecture. Where today's homes rely on insulation foam and climate systems, the Viking house relied on the ancient knowledge that the earth, when shaped with care, can shield those who live close enough to understand it. Beneath the turf and timber, the genius of Viking construction extended into the very ground itself. Unlike modern foundations that anchor deep and hard into the soil, Viking homes rested on shallow stone pads or skids, deliberately loose, intentionally flexible. At first glance, it seems counterintuitive. Why would a people surrounded by earthquakes, frost heaves, and shifting soil not seek to nail their homes into the earth? But the answer lay in centuries of watching the land breathe. In the frozen north, the ground does not sit still. It swells with ice in winter, softens with thaw in spring, and quakes with the rumble of deep tectonic forces. A rigid foundation cracks under that strain. But a floating foundation made of flat stones set into the earth and topped with timber sills rises and falls with the land like a ship on rolling waves. The house is never fixed, yet it never fails. This method, passed down through oral tradition and silent observation, allowed the Vikings to build in bogs, on permafrost, or atop uneven hills without compromising stability. If the soil shifted, the house shifted with it. If one stone settled deeper than another, the flexible wooden frame absorbed the difference. There was a humility to the design, a quiet admission that the land was not theirs to tame, only to coexist with. No cement, no rebar, just stone, wood, and understanding. In a world obsessed with permanence, the Vikings built for movement, and in doing so, they created structures that could last lifetimes, not despite the instability of the earth, but because of their respect for it. The roof of a Viking house wasn't just a cap, it was a shield, a sloped and slatted fortress forged to deflect the sky's fury. Where the walls stood firm, the roof danced with the storm, pitched at steep angles to slice through wind and cast off snow before it could weigh the structure down. Heavy wooden beams, often cut from the heart of old-growth trees, formed the spine and ribs of the roof, joined without nails and held together by tension, balance, and mastery. These crossbeams, reinforced by king posts and paired rafters, gave the structure a kind of living skeleton, rigid in frame but supple in response. No symmetry was required. What mattered was harmony with the elements. Thatched reed, sod, or overlapping wooden shingles, each region adapted to its materials, created the outer skin, layered thick, like a warrior's cloak. These materials, far from fragile, were hydrophobic, self-repairing, and astonishingly insulating. But the real brilliance lay in the hidden physics. The aerodynamic profiles allowed fierce coastal winds to pass over rather than pry underneath. Gables were minimal, eaves were modest, and every curve considered the language of the wind. A Viking roof didn't challenge the storm, it anticipated it, absorbing the beating with grace. Inside, the sloping lines created warmth and space, drawing smoke from the hearth upward and letting heat pool in the lower zones where people slept and gathered. From the outside, these homes may have looked humble, almost sunken. But their roofs told another story, a story of balance, weight, and defiance, written in angles and anchored not by nails, but by knowledge older than iron. Stretching long and low across the Nordic soil, the Viking longhouse was more than a shelter, it was a lifeline, a fortress, and a beating heart of the community, built to withstand not only the fury of storms but the weight of entire seasons. Its very shape whispered a survival strategy honed by generations. From above, the longhouse resembled the hull of an overturned ship, a deliberate echo of the seafaring culture that built it. Its aerodynamic silhouette allowed ferocious winds to roll over rather than crash into it, while its narrow width and elongated form minimized surface area exposed to the elements. Every design choice served a purpose. Fewer windows meant fewer breaches in the walls. Inward, sloping sod roofs deflected snowfall and trapped heat. And though its entrance was modest, stepping inside was like crossing into another world, one of warmth, firelight, and the hum of human resilience. Walls doubled as windbreaks, lined with turf and timber to absorb gusts and muffled howls. Herds of livestock slept within, their body heat contributing to the internal microclimate. Children played in the warmest corner. Warriors sharpened tools near the hearth. Elders told stories that echoed softly along the beams. This wasn't just architecture, it was choreography, every element placed to harmonize with both environment and need. The longhouse was communal, minimal, and brilliantly efficient, crafted not to dominate the land, but to merge with it. And in its enduring stillness amid howling storms, it told a story of adaptation, unity, and the profound truth that the strongest shelters are not always the tallest. They are the ones that bend with the wind and house the soul of a people. Step inside a Viking longhouse during the heart of winter, and you won't find vast, empty rooms or decorative luxuries. Instead, you'll discover a living, breathing system of survival carved into every beam and brick of turf. The interior was a masterclass in utilitarian design, where warmth, strength, and social cohesion were woven into the very structure. A central hearth dominated the core, not just for cooking, but as the lifeblood of heat, its rising smoke escaping slowly through the ridge above, drying the rafters and warming the air beneath the thatch. The layout was symmetrical and intentional. Livestock penned at one end for warmth, humans clustered near the center where heat lingered longest, and storage tucked into shadowed corners where food could remain cool and dry. Thick benches doubled as beds, raised off the floor to avoid drafts. Along the walls, woven tapestries or animal hides hung like insulation, adding both color and protection from the chill that pressed in through the sod. But it wasn't just warmth the interior preserved, it was strength. Vertical posts called staves braced the ceiling, distributing pressure from the heavy roof and snow above. Tie beams spanned the width of the house, locking the structure together like the ribs of a whale. Everything was interconnected, not a single joint wasted, every timber sharing the burden. And through it all ran the quiet pulse of human rhythm. Meals cooked, tools carved, Lullabies hummed beside flickering flames. In the longhouse, the elements outside were held at bay not by brute force, but by intimacy with the land, with the material, with one another. It was a space where architecture and life met in harmony, a testament that true engineering is not only measured in blueprints, but in the breath of those who live within. To truly grasp the brilliance of Viking architecture, one must look beyond the land and toward the sea, for it was on the waves that the Norse honed their most vital structural secrets. The same minds that built longhouses also carved longships, and the parallels are no coincidence. Both were engineered to endure punishment, whether from crashing waves or crushing snowdrifts. Viking shipbuilders mastered the art of overlapping planks, clinker-built hulls that flexed with the ocean's rise and fall, rather than resist it, and that same logic was carried inland to the homes they built. The curvature of roof beams mirrored the keel of a ship, bent and braced to distribute stress across the frame. Lashings, joints, and pegs used in ship construction were repurposed for land-based dwellings, ensuring mobility, strength, and adaptability in hostile conditions. These were not cultures of excess, they were cultures of efficiency, where every lesson from one realm reinforced the next. Just as a ship had to float, bend, and remain watertight, so too did a home have to breathe, shift, and remain storm-tight. The Vikings didn't separate disciplines. To them, carpentry, sailing, and survival were facets of the same truth. A house had to be as sea-ready as it was snow-ready. Even the decorative dragon heads that adorned ship prows found echoes in carved gable ends, warding off evil. Yes, but also reinforcing corners and ridges. This fusion of function and belief, of seafaring and shelter, birthed a design philosophy centuries ahead of its time. The structure must live with the forces it faces, not fight them. In their houses, as in their ships, the Vikings put their faith not in iron, but in ingenuity. One of the most astonishing features of Viking homes wasn't just how they stood the test of storms, but how they could be taken apart, moved, and reassembled like giant wooden puzzles. These were not homes nailed shut for eternity. They were built with foresight and flexibility, designed to serve multiple generations across shifting circumstances. The very techniques that avoided nails, interlocking joints, pegged beams, floating foundations also enabled modularity. If a family needed to relocate due to better grazing lands, soil exhaustion, or conflict, they could disassemble their longhouse, transport the timber frame by sled or boat, and rebuild it elsewhere. Nothing was wasted. Not even the sod layers, which could be lifted in slabs and relaid. This was a society that thought in cycles, not permanence. Roofs were repaired each spring with fresh thatch, posts replaced after seasons of frostbite. Children grew up watching their fathers repair or reshape the frame with the same reverence given to ship maintenance. It wasn't seen as failure when a house needed mending, it was expected, even honored. These structures were alive, aging with the families inside, responsive to the land's demands. More than that, they were sustainable in the truest sense, built from local, renewable materials, requiring no quarrying, no industrial process, no irreversible damage to the environment. In an era where modern homes rise quickly but fall apart within decades, Viking construction offers a startling lesson: longevity does not require permanence. It requires adaptability. Their homes were not monuments, but companions, movable, mendable, and deeply interwoven with the rhythm of a people who understood that resilience isn't about standing still, but about knowing when to move. Centuries may have passed since Viking axes first split timber in the frostbitten north, but their homes have not all vanished. Some still stand, wind-scoured and moss-covered, silent but stubborn in the face of time. In places like Iceland, Greenland, and Norway, remnants of these turf-roofed dwellings remain etched into the landscape, their outlines visible like ancient scars in the earth. But even beyond physical ruins, the brilliance of Viking engineering has been resurrected through experimental archaeology. At places like Borgin-Lofoten or the Islandingur longhouse reconstruction in Iceland, researchers have built full-scale replicas using traditional tools and techniques not to romanticize the past, but to test its logic. In wind tunnels, Viking longhouse models are subjected to simulated coastal storms, and the results are staggering. Their sloped roofs and low profiles redirect airflow, reducing uplift and drag far more effectively than many modern cabins. Structural engineers studying these reconstructions often remark on the unexpected aerodynamic efficiency proof that trial, error, and generational intuition forged a design long before science could explain it. Thermal imaging reveals how turf layering insulates more evenly than fiberglass in sub-zero climates. Moisture tests show that the overlapping wood joints, when cut with precision and left unsealed, breathe just enough to prevent condensation and mold. What we call primitive, they perfected. And even now, architects and climate-resilient builders look back to these designs not out of nostalgia, but necessity. In a warming world of volatile weather and resource scarcity, the Viking longhouse offers a model of shelter that is both elegant and elemental. It is not merely a relic, it is a roadmap, a living testament to what can be built when you listen, not to blueprints, but to the wind. If the walls of a Viking longhouse could speak, they would whisper stories far older than parchment. These homes weren't just built, they were born of memory, molded by hands that knew every notch and curve before the blade ever touched wood. In the Norse world, building a house was not just construction, it was initiation. Young boys stood beside their fathers, watching silently as iron bit into pine, as ropes were tightened by muscle and frost-numbed fingers. It was here, in sawdust and shadow, that generations learned the language of timber, the feel of grain under a knife, the way a joint must creak just once before settling into place. There were no manuals, no drawings, only voice and ritual. Oral tradition carried the blueprint, and every home was a sacred echo of the one before it. Songs accompanied the raising of beams. Blessings were murmured as the first hearthstones were laid. The ridgepole, the crown of the roof, was often dedicated with a carved symbol or animal bone, a quiet plea to the gods for strength and protection. These customs weren't superstition. They were structure. The very act of remembering became architecture. Knowledge was anchored in rhythm. How many steps from hearth to wall, how the wind curved over the gable, when to harvest timber so that it didn't split in the cold. Each longhouse became a time capsule of family history and craftsmanship, one post carved by a grandfather, another added by a son. These homes didn't just protect bodies, they held legacies, frozen into their frames like rings in a tree. And in a world where stone crumbles and steel rusts, it is memory etched into wood, passed hand to hand that endures the storm. In an age obsessed with innovation, there's a strange irony. Some of the most modern truths lie buried beneath sod and timber. As architects today wrestle with rising temperatures, violent weather, and dwindling resources, many are rediscovering what the Vikings knew instinctively, that strength doesn't always come from force, but from flexibility. Modern construction, with its reliance on rigid materials, synthetic insulation, and mass-produced nails, often crumbles under stress the Viking house would simply absorb. The more we fortify with concrete and steel, the more brittle we become. And yet, Viking methods once dismissed as primitive are now surfacing in sustainable architecture. Passive heating, green roofs, breathable walls, and modular design. Even earthquake-resilient housing borrows from their floating foundation logic. But while science finally validates what the Norse intuited, there's still something modern builders often miss: the soul of the structure. The Vikings didn't build for profit or speed. They built with intention, rooted in place, climate, and community. Every joint, every beam, every layer of turf was a conversation with the land, not a conquest over it. Their homes were neither fast nor flashy, but they endured, not in spite of their simplicity, but because of it. As cities today reel from hurricanes, floods, and fire, architects look back not just to the skyscrapers, but to the longhouses, long, low, and listening to the wind. Perhaps the most dangerous thing we ever did was forget that the earth moves, breathes, and speaks. The Vikings never forgot. And in remembering them, we remember how to build not just with tools, but with humility. And so we return to the edge of the world, where frost bites deep, wind carves the earth like water, and the sky never stays still. There, nestled low against the hillside, half swallowed by snow and time, a Viking longhouse still stands. Its turf roof is heavy with winter's weight, its wooden beams darkened by smoke and rain. And yet it endures not by resisting the storm, but by understanding it. This home does not defy nature. It cooperates with it. Every creak in the wood, every breath of heat from the hearth, is part of an ancient agreement between humanity and the elements. Without nails, without blueprints, without modern machines, these structures weathered centuries because they were built not to dominate, but to adapt. They yield without breaking. They breathe with the wind. They remind us that true resilience isn't found in brute strength, it's found in wisdom, in patience, in listening. In the Viking world, a house was never just a shelter. It was a story of survival, of generations, of hands that shaped the earth not with arrogance, but with reverence. And even now, in an era of glass towers and digital speed, their quiet genius remains whispering through turf and timber that the strongest homes are not always the ones we see. Sometimes, they are the ones that stand long after we've forgotten how they were made.